We're really pleased to be co-hosting this event with Valence, and I'll let Max tell you a bit more about their project.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. Thank you so much for showing up. This is our first event where Valence is hosting. Thank you, Seb, one of our early backers, for putting this on. Valence helps protocols do business with other protocols. You can think of it as like in TradFi, there are institutional markets that are much larger than retail markets. In crypto, the institutions are blockchains, dApps, and DAOs, and so we help them do business with each other. I'm excited for this panel, share a bit more about that, have these great guests, and let's get to it.
So to kick things off,
liquidity fragmentation is
a pretty big issue in crypto, and causes a lot of inefficiencies, overhead costs, etc. How do you guys perceive this fragmentation, and what are some of the core issues that it causes? Possibly like each of your protocols, how do you tackle that fragmentation? Anyone want to take a stab at that?
I can start. I think there are multiple levels of fragmentation. There is one level which is just how many different assets you have, and I think in total, like crypto community and like partners, wallets, custodians, whatever, they only have let's say capacity for so many different assets to support. So let's say for the assets that are outside of top maybe 50, it's very difficult to get in front of the users in all these key channels, such as, I don't know, like Binance wallets or like Ledger or something like that. So I think if you're an asset outside of this category, then it's way more difficult for you. So I think that's one aspect of the fragmentation. The other aspect is just technical fragmentation in terms of it's more difficult for the DeFi protocols to deal with the liquidity that sits across multiple different chains. So there's that, and you need to deal with this in different ways. So I think these are probably the two most important aspects. I think I know how to deal with the technical aspect of fragmentation, and I think this is where actually Cosmos ecosystem is really, really good at, because the cross-chain use cases in Cosmos work really well now, and you kind of don't have to really think where your assets sit before you can use them on any chain in Cosmos. So that's actually a solved problem. The first problem was way more difficult to solve, and I think there is more consolidation going on right now as well. So there is more interest to the kind of high-performing assets, and less interest to the altcoins, at least like last maybe half a year or a year. So yeah, that's a difficult problem to deal with. Maybe someone else on the panel has a solution for it.
One thing I'll add here is that some of this fragmentation, it's a little inevitable. So what do we do about it? One thing that's really important is to just be as efficient as you can with the liquidity that you do have. And we talk about crypto speedrunning a lot of our financial infrastructure. We have DEXs, that's like the NASDAQ, we have lending protocols, that's like mortgages, these are pieces of it. But one really big missing piece is monetary policy. It's one of the biggest drivers. Like when the Fed changes by just a few basis points, the whole world watches. It's a really important thing. And almost all of crypto has been copying Bitcoin's lead of just defining monetary policy, their inflation rate on day zero, and hoping it works out. Obviously, Ethereum has made some changes. Like they're getting a bit more sophisticated, but especially as you have new protocols, these challengers going against these incumbents. When it comes to this fragmentation, they're going to have to make the most of their liquidity. Monetary policy is a really big way of going about that. So I expect to see more of that when it comes to managing this fragmentation issue.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. Actually, the monetary policy point, we do have it in Cosmos, right? Like inflation rates being set based on like sort of the staking rate, but basically almost no one changes that, right? And I think other protocols often have like limited supply too, especially the VC-backed ones, because you want to like say, okay, we have this much supply and this percentage of tokens is allocated to certain like ecosystem development stuff, but they don't really take into account that it's actually a protocol that probably needs to, incentivize liquidity and all that. So all that is pretty archaic still managed. Pretty much like, in the best case, I guess, some DAO proposals that, some outsource to some sort of consulting firm or something. So it doesn't seem like it should be a bit more core to what the protocols do. And I guess the tooling around that is actually still pretty immature from my perspective as well, yeah.
I think one thing that we looked into is like working with LPs for liquidity deals. I think right now it's like you work directly with LPs or family offices, but there's a few tools that are coming to market where just liquidity marketplaces, like Royco, for example, is coming to market and enables you to do like permissionless kind of LP staking. So if I'm a LP, I can get the best deals with infrastructure providers. If I'm a layer 1, layer 2, I can essentially have a marketplace for, okay, I want TVL from this source. So I think there's a better software that's coming to market for liquidity management. I think from a technical point of view, there's a lot of L1s, L2s. You touched on the Cosmos thesis of IBC. I think IBC comes to L2s as well, and we're working with the union as well. So as bridging Interop standards increase and liquidity management software gets better, then I think that we can address some of the issues you're saying.
Yeah, management of liquidity and efficiency, I think, is a big part of this. And touching on that point, you were talking about how things are inefficient, and Max as well. How do we help make liquidity management more programmatic, and how do we improve efficiency so that we can best manage the liquidity that we already have, and arrive at something that looks more like traditional markets rather than this sort of like multi-sig approach that a lot of protocols have taken?
Yeah, I can touch on this. So there are many perspectives on like Cosmos and like the interchain. One thing that's undeniable is that Cosmos is a really great place to get a peek into the future. So what's happening in Cosmos will likely eventually make its way over to ETH, Solana, everywhere else. And so something that we're seeing in Cosmos is the Cosmos Hub as a whole, as an entity, deploying liquidity to various strategic places. It could be to an Atom staked Atom pair to increase adoption of liquid staking. Neutron doing a bunch of bilateral liquidity deals where they put in half the amount, another protocol put in half the amount, and together they bootstrap liquidity on a DEX. That can also be done to a lending protocol. If you provide liquidity to a lending protocol, interest rates go down, borrowing goes up, fees go up, and stimulates DeFi. And so this is no amount of whales doing this is going to change the monetary policy. When the blockchain as a whole takes these actions, it's an incredibly capital efficient way of doing this, because the Cosmos Hub, they control the inflation rate. So to some extent, it's almost free for them to deploy this liquidity to these various places, and only in the event of impermanent loss might it actually cost them something. And so there have been like some small steps towards this. Every single time it's required a governance proposal, which is just a huge pain, a lot of psychic damage, not very efficient. It's also required a multi-sig, and so it can't respond in real time. There are a lot of issues. But despite all of these issues, these deals are still getting done. With like osmosis, there's many of these deals getting done. So as the barriers to entry go down, as it gets more automated, as there are ways for protocols to actually monetize these liquidity deployments, this could be a really big source of liquidity and greater efficiency.
Does anybody else have any thoughts on this topic? All right, I guess you summarized it pretty well. And so what are some strategies that y'all are thinking about to like attract new liquidity to your protocols? And I think maybe taking a step back also, and this was another topic I had here, was like the global macro situation, and how do we bring in more liquidity into the ecosystem generally, but maybe just sort of keeping it within crypto liquidity for the moment. Like what are some strategies for attracting more protocol liquidity?
Yeah, I think important thing to note right now, I guess, in the state of the market, it's like kind of the same liquidity moving around. So I guess that's a kind of core of the problem. Like, how do you actually bring net new liquidity in? I think one interesting thing from my perspective, also building a shared security protocol, is that you can sort of tie these features together partially, where maybe you're a protocol and actually, you have security needs, you want to be secured by certain assets. And you can also like tie kind of the liquidity part and the security part together, essentially, and saying, hey, okay, I allow your token to also provide security to my my ecosystem, and in turn we bring some liquidity, things like that. So like kind of deals that Max was just talking about, you know, becoming like tying two features together. I also think, yeah, basically, like I guess some projects are already doing that, and I think we will see more of that.
So you think that LOT protocols can be security providers, but also like liquidity providers, just that provide more
because
value?
It's very important what sort of assets you get to secure your chain, right? Like there can be, anyone wants to restake, basically. I guess we've seen that there's a lot of supply for staked assets, but it really matters who you're kind of taking the security from. So you can either like kind of choose the asset, but maybe you can go more granular and say like, okay, you only receive the staking yield if you also provide liquidity on the DEX, on the chain, or something like that, basically.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think what we see many chains doing recently in terms of what they call either like proof of liquidity or enshrined liquidity or something like that, I think that's a very interesting way, because staking yield is a very good way to incentivize liquidity provisioning, and liquidity is critical for the ecosystem success, which is basically what we're discussing today. And if you combine these things together, they create a very interesting flywheel effect potentially. So for instance, what Anish is doing with this enshrined liquidity thing, I think is probably going to be very good for the ecosystem, because if they incentivize with the staking yield the pools that are critically important for the ecosystem, then they kind of force more liquidity into the ecosystem. Therefore, there's kind of larger DeFi that's going to exist in the niche ecosystem, for instance, and therefore there's going to be potentially more DeFi users. I think for any ecosystem, it's very important to kind of cross the chasm between the level of DeFi adoption where it's kind of good enough for retail users to the level of DeFi adoption where it's good enough for like more of an institutional VC type of user. So I think in Atom ecosystem, for instance, now, this is not the case. So if you're like a VC and you want to use, I don't know, like $10 million of Atom to lend $3 million of USDC, that's impossible to do. And if you kind of cross this category line and say, okay, now we're at the state of DeFi where we're good enough for VCs, then I think you actually kind of unlock a lot of growth. And maybe enshrined liquidity is a very good way to do so.
Rishi, movements like gotten quite a bit of liquidity commitments pre-launch. So can you share some strategies or like your thoughts on what are the best ways that protocols, emerging protocols, can secure liquidity? So they have liquidity on launch day.
I think our thesis was like L1s and L2s today have done like the points program, which is rather stupid and cooked. I think the best example is like a Blast, where they had like 2 billion TVL and then 2 billion like in the token value originally. So it's fundamentally no way that the token can actually incentivize LPs. So everyone got mad at Blast, right? So the whole like points for TVL meta doesn't make much sense. So the way we approach it is like, I think the Athena model was really good, where you have like around 20 institutional LPs off the bat that you have fixed deals with that are going to be there with you even when the bear market comes, and they'll provide liquidity for years and stick to them. So Athena did really well is that at 20 LPs, they were original TVL, and then you get slow and steady growth, and now Athena is a pretty great stablecoin with healthy TVL. We approach that with Layer 2 as well, where we have around 15 LPs that are some of the biggest names providing TVL from staked ETH, wrapped Bitcoin, USDC, etc. And that's locked up for like years based on deals that we have with them. So we don't need to do this whole points for TVL farming, because that's predatory capital. We prefer institutional capital that's there for highs and lows, and then slow and steady increased TVL. And I think that's a healthier way to approach it.
And how do you reason about having that liquidity sort of trickle down into the ecosystem?
Well, you have that capital deployed into dApps, for example. So like Echelon's, lending protocol, you'll have that staked ETH deploying lending protocol. You'll have at Meridian Vaults, which enable you to earn APY on the yield aggregation stuff. So all the TVL that we raise will go into the apps themselves, actually. And we're working with custodians as well, like Anchorage, to have custodial support for the assets. And then they have a wallet called Porto, so we'll be one of the first use cases of Porto wallet coming to other apps.
And I think like opening up to the whole panel here, when it comes to allocating liquidity into protocols, what are some of the parameters or that goes into reallocating liquidity over time, as the protocol and as the sort of layer one or layer two in this case?
It's a few things.
Grows?
It's like audits, obviously, if you're deploying capital, it has to be secure and like make sure they get the audits done properly. Usually it's the one that's raised venture capital and have communities and are going on to launch subsequent tokens as well because there's more financial upside for the ecosystem. So I think it's like just legitimacy of the protocol. How serious is the team? Do we know them? Obviously, you don't want to king make per se, but even like Solana, when it started off, we king make the first like 10 protocols. So any kind of major ecosystem has to do that.
Yeah, we've seen some interesting approaches to do this. So often protocols will just like start by getting just one deal done. So whether it's like one person from one protocol, another person from another protocol, like what's the deal? They'll put it to their governance bodies. If it passes, it gets done. If enough of that happens, they want to scale it. Initia has their VIP product and Cosmos Hub has their Atom Wars Hydro product. It's basically like curve style gauges where like people can vote on where they think this pool of liquidity should go, and then protocols that want that liquidity can incentivize their gauge so that people have a reason to vote for that. That's another viable option for this. And something that Felix was saying earlier when it comes to these like shared security, when you're a new protocol and you're getting off the ground, you need not just one but two things. You need security, which all these restaking protocols are doing. You also need liquidity. And if you're an LRT, you're taking a bet on this AVS being successful. And so you want to do everything in your power to make sure that AVS does succeed. And providing them liquidity on day one helps them do that. It also gives you that much more upside in that protocol, in that AVS, should they succeed. So there are a lot of things that can happen here for liquidity on day zero, but also liquidity over time with these gauges.
Cool. So kind of related to this, and I think this is also a question for movement. Building a strong community is really important for long-term success, and I think you guys have been very successful so far. Pre-launch at building a community. Can you share some of those strategies? Because that also ties into now like then bringing in liquidity into the ecosystem.
Well, I think it's just like we have a community team that does like helps people organize events. So I think one thing that we're seeing that's unique is we have a huge presence in like Africa and Thailand and like Latam, and people are just like organizing their own movement meetups, and we're not even involved. And they're coming to us and be like, "Hey, can we have $100 for pizza?" I'm like, "Of course you can have $100 for pizza." Like, sure, go ahead. Or like t-shirt money. So I think like one thing that I really prioritize is like, ultimately, there's a bunch of like infrastructure L1s and L2s. The number one priority for any system should be community, because that's your consumers, that's your target customers per se, right? And I think a lot of chains do all the tech stuff and go to market that, and like don't really give a shit about the community, and then you find out like, oh wait, no one's using this thing and no one's buying the token, so I just lost. So I think a lot of chains now have kind of realized that community has to come first, and not even just like a hand wavy kind of way, like directly work with validator groups, large regional groups, DevRel groups. I think we have a new meetup every week in some part of the world. So I think we've been doing a good job on that.
Yeah, I think picking up on the validator thing, validators are often kind of overlooked part of the community, but many of them
Say validators?
Yeah, validators. But many of them have super strong kind of local communities. So what we found out is that that's a super powerful channel for us, in fact. And so we have validators running like a local workshops where they're kind of educating their communities on liquid staking and such, which is amazing to see. So once you figure out kind of the right incentive structure for these guys as well, then it starts to work in the surprising ways. So yeah, I think validators are key really to work with the community.
Yeah, especially in developing regions. Obviously, the user base probably doesn't have a lot of financial capital to organize events and have the bandwidth for that. Usually, the validator groups are investors or like more technically savvy, so they know how crypto works, but also has capital to organize events like this. So I think our go-to-market as well has been like partnering with regional validator groups and developer groups, and they themselves know who are the community members. So that's how we kind of branch out.
Yeah, we talked about liquidity fragmentation earlier. We also have an issue of community fragmentation.
Totally.
Geographic
fragmentation.
Like we have all sorts of fragmentation. One interesting thing that happened earlier. So Neutron and Osmosis are both Cosmos chains. That there was a lot of potential competition between the two. And one of the reasons why that was the case was that there aren't really like tools for them to collaborate and pursue positive sum activity. And once those tools existed, they ended up doing a shared liquidity deal between the two of them so that both of them had an interest in each other's success. And yes, they still have some competitive dynamics, but like the bad blood between them has like almost entirely gone away. And that was really cool to see that like Neutron and Osmosis aren't going to be these two communities fighting for people, but instead like can recognize things that they have in common and pursue positive sum activity. That's between two like Cosmos chains. Like what's going to happen when Bitcoin L2s and ETH L2s and Solana L2s start doing business with each other, start interacting, and like we as a crypto community start taking action in a more effective direction in a way that we feel a bit more united, less isolated, and achieve that full potential.
Actually, I had a follow-up question for Rushi on this. You mentioned that a lot of your community is in developing markets. A lot of the capital is coming from developed markets, the West, like Europe and the US. When investors are coming to you and to your ecosystem, how do you help bridge that maybe cultural gap between the Western investors and developing markets?
I think we are the bridge. So like our job is to be an infrastructure provider, building ecosystem community. For a lot of the Western investors, they obviously aren't doing the effort to build community in Africa and develop in Southeast Asia. But that's kind of our job, right? So a lot of our work is obviously developing the infrastructure, but I think more importantly, like communicating investors. Like we have done so much work for community meetups, community development in these regions that if you're looking to get exposure to developing markets, we're one of the only bets, I would say, in the space where you can directly see the impact, where every week there's developer talent coming in, there's builders. We just did something, a hackathon in Hangzhou. So Cooper, my co-founder, was there, and we had 10 builders compete as a top 10. I think it was over 30 builders, and 10 won the prize. So I think we are the bridge, and we'll continue to do so.
Actually, kind of like on a tangent almost, but I think one thing that I think is not talked about enough, I guess, is like sort of this overly institutionalization of crypto and VC-funded projects. And I think you can say what you want about points or like airdrops, but basically they're also like very accessible, and everyone has sort of the same structure, the same deal. As we go more institutional and preferential treatment for big LPs and big whales and VCs, then obviously all the upside is kind of kept with them, and there's not enough actually for the community. So I think like fair launches and all the things that we actually built blockchains for, and even ICOs, like are things that we might want to see like more again too, in some way, to actually also help these people with less money or less access to the teams to also participate.
Yeah, like I was at the Galaxy Movement event the other night, and some guy was showing me his new NFT, and he says, "What do you think about $100 for a mint?" I was like, "Well, like look at the markets that you're addressing, and is that something that's accessible for most of the people that you're targeting with this mint?" And he was like, "Yeah, okay, maybe $10 is better, or maybe $5 is better, and that might get you more traction in those places." So as we wrap up here, looking ahead, we're going to open it up a little bit. What innovations, specifically, I guess, in DeFi, are you most excited about in the next coming years?
I can start. So I'll start by not showing my own stuff. Like the one thing that is really cool, if you guys haven't checked it out, I recommend checking out Baseline protocol. It's a really cool way to get a token off the ground in a way where it's like fully backed, removes a lot of removes the need for like market making. There's just a bunch of really cool features. I don't want to compare it too much to Olympus DAO, but there are some similarities, and it's very neat. I think that's going to be best in class for starting a new token from a just tokenomics, cryptonomics perspective. When it comes to tokens that already exist, I think finding ways for them to like do deals with others. We're seeing all these L2s, we're seeing all this restaking, and if they just try to do the same exact playbook that all those that came before them did, like they're going to have a really hard time. These challengers are going to need like these some new weapons in this liquidity war that's happening, and finding ways to work together, I think, is going to be one of the better strategies going forward. So I'm really excited for Symbiotic and the sort of restaking protocols they're doing. So yeah, that's my answer.
I think from my perspective, we had a bunch of super successful protocols like Anchor that were very simple to use, but also based on some kind of Ponzi's. And since then, we don't have a similar category of products that would bring more or less predictable yield with a simple UI, let's say. So that all the ways to get yield in DeFi now are super, super complex. So if you look at other FI strategies, they're all oh, you get these 3 type of points or that 3 type of points. And it's so difficult to figure out what are you actually getting and how you, when you get these points, well, first of all, when you get them, how you convert them into something tangible and so on. So I think the next wave of innovation could be how to package all this kind of yield that potentially exists there into a product that is straightforward for you to use for any investor that gets you more or less predictable yield for the assets that you actually want to hold. So I think it's very simple, but it actually takes a lot of kind of effort to put the stuff under the hood together to make good UX for this type of product. So once we have this, I think we will actually have more users actually willing to use these products.
I'm actually bullish alternative assets. This is interesting. So next week, Helix, one of our ecosystem teams, is announcing the raise, and they're working on bringing wrapped Cardano and EOS and Neo and all these tokens. And you might laugh, but Cardano is the 7th biggest token right now in market cap, and no one touches it on DeFi. So if you can get 1/100th of Cardano's asset class on your lending protocol, you'll probably be one of the biggest lending protocols in the space. So I'm actually putting a good amount of resources there because no one's doing it. Bullish Cardano.
Yeah. Everyone talking about Bitcoin, but you're going for the alternative assets. That's actually quite interesting.
I'm going to take all the dead chick tokens.
Yeah, I think I'm in general more, I guess, also on the infra side. So I'm still more excited about some of the advances there, both in kind of ZK. I guess we've talked about that a lot, right? But also privacy enhancing tech, right? I think threshold encryption. And stuff like that is still very interesting to me, and minimizing sort of the negative impact of MEV and things like that, and just all that maturing and stuff that we've talked about in theory for years now, kind of working out, coming to market, and I think that's where we're going this cycle, and hopefully it will finally happen, and we will be able to have apps that consumers actually use at some point.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think to the point of Cardano, I think that's actually a very good point. Because if you think about all these altcoins that are sitting there idle, that's billions and billions of dollars of potential liquidity that are not used for anything. I think until FTX crashed, there was a huge lending market, and they actually could be used in this lending market in galaxies of the world. And since then, this market basically completely collapsed. And for now, this lending market for alts only exists in the largest centralized exchanges. So I think if we figure out some kind of a decentralized protocol that actually is capable of taking yield of these altcoins, and so that people can maybe just borrow USDC against it at a reasonable rate and use it somewhere else, I think that will open up so much liquidity, you won't believe it. I think that's going to be huge.
Cardano is pumping right now.
So the thing you're looking for is called Helix, and they're announcing the raise next week. So I'll send it to you. So Cardano, bullish.
All right. Not financial advice. All right. Thank you so much, guys. Thanks for everybody coming, and thanks to our panel.
Yes.
Cheers.
Thanks for hosting us.